10:01 if we want to get started, or we can wait another minute. It's up to you, Dave.
There are 28 attendees on the call. 29.
Okay, well, by my watch, it's 10:01. So I would like to welcome everybody this morning and thank you for joining us. Just a few reminders as we get started. This is although it's a virtual conference, we want it to be interactive. We certainly are going to be sharing a great deal of information and appreciate that there may be questions along the way. You have a couple of ways to ask your questions. We have Nicole acting as our proctor this morning, and she is going to be monitoring the Q&A window. That is perhaps your most expedient and best way to ask questions, and also importantly, that shares your questions with other members attending today. So we may avoid some duplication there, and your answers may be available there without asking the question. If you don't see the questions that you have, and you have something that's just burning your seat there and you have to ask it, please raise your hand. We will be monitoring the hand raising feature on the participant side, and we can enable you to speak. So that is also another opportunity. These questions are going to be helpful to everyone, and we will do our best to answer them. And if Nicole can't answer that herself, she will refer to another panelist. We're going to briefly pause between slides to enable questions and give you an opportunity to consider what's been shared. I know this is a great deal of information. I do want to remind you today that this is a competitive RFP under these two funding priorities. That means all currently funded applicants must submit applications. And if you're a currently funded applicant and you're considering or proposing a new program, you have to submit a separate application for that new program. And I encourage you to do that if that's your interest. Also, one final thing, assume that we don't know anything about you, because we do have a community advisory panel of members who are not staff, who will be reviewing and contributing to our review of your application submissions. So write them as if we don't know who you are, what you do, or how you do it. So make it very clear, and that will help your application in the long run receive higher consideration. So I don't have anything else on the homework or side or the housekeeping side, but I do want to introduce our staff. This next slide has a listing of all of our staff. For those of you who know us, it's redundant, but for those of you who don't, I think it's important to recognize the folks that have worked here for years and will be integral in this application and have been so in others. So you need to be familiar with them and understand what they do. Of course, I'm Dave Heaton, the Executive Director. Laura Hasse is our Director of Program Operations. She's kind of managing this whole process. Zach Hackley is our Director of Finance. He will be with you along this path as you no doubt struggle with some of the budget numbers. Chanda is our Manager of Planning, Evaluation, and Community Development. She is our in-house expert on measurable outcomes and performance measures and all things related to our research of what's most cutting edge out there, and hopefully can be of assistance to all of you as you look to make your program better. Cherie Ramirez is our Manager of Community Engagement. She is out and about and our face of the organization often at a lot of your events, so I know most of you know her. Christine Georges is our Administrative Service Manager. She keeps me in line, manages our board and council's needs and issues, and our building. Jennifer Carter is working with Zach as a fiscal specialist, and she is also on this call as a panelist. So not as a panelist, but as a participant in case questions come up that are related to things that Zach's not completely familiar with. So she is a valuable resource to you as well. Brandon Fabre is our newest staff member, and he is our accounts payable specialist. He is on the call as well. Kara Good, you'll hear a great deal from this morning. She is our in-house expert on the grants module and has put most of this presentation together. So Kara is going to be the voice of this process for the most part. Nicole King is another one of our contract specialists, and she is our proctor this morning and certainly will be helpful to you in guiding questions and fielding some of that and kind of playing referee here. Stephanie Macera is our executive assistant for program support. She is our administrative support for this whole process and puts spreadsheets together and manages our review. So if you have any need to respond or ask any questions or contact any of these folks, their email addresses are there. We will also speak later about a general email process for questions that can be addressed to either the program side of the organization or the fiscal side of the organization. So next slide. I think this is Laura's slide, correct?
That's okay. Third slide. Yes, good morning, everybody. Laura Hasse, Director of Program Operations. We are currently accepting applications under 2 funding priority areas. The first is our Strong Nurturing Families priority, and the second is our Safe, Stable Communities priority areas. As Dave already mentioned, this is a competitive grant process. And I'll go through the timeline in a later slide, but the applications are due by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, April 27th. Next slide. And this, Chanda.
Good morning, this is Chanda Narkowitz, and I'm reading an excerpt from the RFP to set the stage for these 2 funding priority areas. Stable, positive relationships are essential to prevent early adversity and also shape the development of children's physical, emotional, social, behavioral, and intellectual capacities. Additionally, practices and approaches that support a trauma-informed culture can decrease the residual of adverse experiences and create welcoming environments for children. As a result, promoting strong, nurturing relationships and safe, resilient communities positively impact children and help assure they reach their full potential.
Okay, I discussed the 2 funding priority areas. As you can see listed here, we actually have subcategories in each priority area that we are accepting proposals under. The first, under Strong Nurturing Families, is we are looking for programs for resource navigation and family-centered coaching toward economic self-reliance. I'm going to discuss each of these subcategories a little bit in more detail at a later slide. Also, parent education within a protective factors framework. And then under our Safe, Stable Communities, we are looking for proposals under the reduction of delinquency and gang involvement, absenteeism, out-of-school suspension, bullying and victimization, and programs that promote and support healthy relationships and reduce intimate partner violence. Before moving on to the next slide, I just want to encourage everyone, strongly encourage everyone to make sure they read the RFP in detail. You can find that both on our website and also, as Kara demonstrates the grant, the solicitation and application. There's a lot of resources that are provided for all of you. The RFP, please pay close attention to our leading indicators of impact, as well as our strategic investment statements. Also, within each subcategory, we have detailed narrative of what we are looking for under each area. And within the RFP, there's lots of resources and links provided to help you navigate your application and your responses. We also have updated quantitative data for 2022. That will also be provided as a link. Please review our program and funding policies as well as our chart of accounts. Those have also been updated as of last week. They were approved by council, so there have been some changes. And then please, if you haven't already reviewed our strategic plan, that is also available on our website, as well as a link through the application process. Next slide, please. Okay, with our first subcategory, as you can see, this is broken down into two parts. A1 is resource navigation, and A2, family-centered coaching toward economic self-reliance. Whoever replies to this subcategory, please, when you fill out your application, clearly indicate whether you are applying to A1 or A2 or both. As you can see at the asterisk down at the bottom, applicants responding to both A1 and A2 may be higher prioritized within our review process. And we are looking for programs with a generational approach for family stability and economic self-reliance under category A2. A1, just to give a little bit more detail, is that we are looking for navigation and supports that connect families to needed programs and services. We will be looking to see that there's an extensive list of collaborative partnerships, necessary linkages, necessary programs that may be connected is childcare, after school programs, parenting programs, basic needs, basically anything that a family may need support in connecting to. This will also include assistance with filling out Medicaid and SNAP applications. So we are looking for programs that can provide this type of support. And through the Medicaid and SNAP, there will also be some necessary reporting as we work through our contract with the Department of Children and Families and our Medicaid claiming. So there will be some monthly reporting that is required under this A1 resource navigation. Under A2, the family-centered coaching toward economic self-reliance, we are really looking for programs that will help move a family towards being more economically self-sufficient and reduce their need for public and private subsidies. These proposals that we're looking for are family-centered coaching. And I want to point out here in the slide where it says not case management, there is a resource that is embedded in the RFP itself. And I'll share that with you now. It's familycenteredcoaching.org. And I encourage anyone applying under A2 to reach out or to familiarize yourself with that website. There's tools and guides that you can follow that you can work towards your proposal. Next slide, please. Under strong nurturing families, the second subcategory that we're looking for proposals are under the parent education within a protective factors framework. Again, the RFP will detail what exactly we're looking for, but this is essentially looking for parent education programs that teach positive parenting skills and reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. The protective factors framework is a strength-based approach to promote healthy outcomes. The next slide, please. The safe, stable communities priority area, we've actually broken it down into 4 subcategories. As mentioned earlier, we're looking for programs that reduce delinquency and gang involvement, reduce absenteeism and out-of-school suspensions, reduce bullying and victimization, and programs that support and promote healthy relationships and reduce intimate partner violence. I want to point out here, and one of the things in our program and funding policies is that CSC, one of our guiding principles is that we address service gaps. So when you propose your program, we're looking to fund programs that complement existing programs and not necessarily supplant or replace. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if the school district is required to provide certain programming, or the Department of Juvenile Justice is required to provide certain programming, we're not looking to replace those resources, we're looking to complement those resources. So when you read through the RFP, pay close attention to the type of programs that we're interested in funding. Yes, I think that was all. That's like, okay, the timeline. The application was actually, and RFP was actually released last Wednesday, March 30th. Obviously, today is the virtual proposers conference. This will be available on our website after today, as well as the PowerPoint. Applications are due, it's an online system. They're due by April 27th at 5 p.m. I want to encourage everybody that prior to submitting your application, maybe give yourself a few days grace period and have somebody review your program, review your application that is not familiar with your program. They can help answer any questions or help provide you with guidance. So if something is unclear to them, that you can fix that before you submit the application. As Dave had mentioned, we have a citizens advisory panel that will also be reviewing the application. So they may not be familiar with your programs at all if you're currently funded with us, or if you're proposing something new, staff and the CAP would not be familiar with your program at all. So that's just a little helpful tip. We also recommend that as you're working on your application, that you put your responses in a Word document. So that way, if you forget to hit the save button, that you actually have your responses and you don't have to type it out again. As you see on the timeline, the review process will actually take place through the end of April and May. And then if necessary, we may ask to meet with some of the applicants. We don't anticipate that, but there is some time built into that. And then we will be making recommendations for funding to our council at our August 22nd meeting. And then the contract year is for an October 1st start date. We moved our contract years last year. We used to be July through June. We are now on an October through September timeline. Next slide. Nicole.
That's me. Good morning. My name is Nicole Key. I'm a contract specialist here at CSC. And if you are receiving funds from Children's Services Council currently, then you are very familiar with the eligibility requirements. And if you are not, then you need to pay attention to this slide and possibly the next. So according to our policies, which are located in the website, as well as mentioned within the RFP, pay attention to those policies as stated. And as a reminder, again, this is a competitive process for eligible organizations. So those that are proposing a Martin County-based program that are not currently funded by CSC under this priority area qualify, and those that are currently receiving funding from CSC under this priority area who want to continue or revise or expand are also eligible to apply under this priority area. Also pay attention, as Laura mentioned, the strategic plan, which outlines our guiding principles for this RFP. Again, that's to foster collaboration among provider agencies and encourage collective impact among the partners and develop robust systems of care, as well as funding is informed by current qualitative and quantitative data that indicates essential areas for positively impacting children's well-being. In addition, preference to proven program models that are research proven and evidence-based with demonstrated positive impact with sustainable replicable outcomes. Again, you can locate all of these at our website, cscmc.org, and follow the guidelines and strategic plan there. Next slide. Funding requirements. Again, as I mentioned, the policies and the sample contract and the budget and the chart of accounts are also located on our CSC website under the menu heading Funding Info, Application, and Funding Information. All agencies that apply under this priority area will be subject to the policies. If, however, you determine you cannot comply, then you will need to submit a waiver request. In addition, as mentioned, the online application must be electronically submitted by Wednesday, April 27th at 5 p.m. Within the online application, the applicant must have authorized, duly authorized official executive director equivalent must certify the application that it is true and correct. And following the submission deadlines, date and time, no further application information will be accepted. Sorry.
Good morning. I'm Zach Hackley. I'm the Director of Finance here at CSC. Just a couple things as it relates to your budget and supporting documents. In the application, you're going to see that you must fill out a program budget, and with that comes a staffing table. The staffing table talks about the positions in which the organization will be asking for reimbursement for. So that being said, please make sure the staffing table does tie to your total budget. The total salaries in the staffing table should flow over to the budget tab. As it relates to budgets, we would love to see a total agency budget uploaded, but as it relates to when inputting the budget in the RFP or into the application, please use the program budget. And lastly, we'll also need you guys to upload a copy of your board of directors, your IRS 990, and your audited financial statements. And also note that certificates of insurance will be asked for as well. Thank you.
Good morning again. This is Chanda, and I'm going to start my presentation with this taxonomy that refers to your program interventions and curricula, and it was developed by applied researchers at USF. So within your application, there will be a narrative question that asks you to provide for every primary program outcome an indication of whether your interventions and or your curricula are research-based, evidence-based, or research-proven. Research-based interventions and curricula are based upon the most current available research and or practice knowledge, and it guides program design and implementation. Typically, evidence or research-based rather interventions or curricula are typically reported out via process evaluation or outputs. Evidence-based interventions or curricula are effective at some level or degree, and progress is typically determined by a post measure or a pre-post measure or test. You don't always need a pre-measure within this field. Evidence-based interventions or curricula provide very specific directives as to intensity, frequency, and time frame of participant exposure in order to have a positive effect. Therefore, implementation fidelity in using evidence-based interventions or curricula is very important to achieve the expected outcome. When completing the application, it would be very helpful to include what criteria was met for the intervention or the curriculum to be evidence-based determined, especially across evidence-based curricula. There is a wide range of that criteria, and so that would be helpful for us to know that information. And it might also set the stage for your meaningful improvement. Research-based interventions refer to an empirical design in which a problem is identified, relevant data are gathered, and a hypothesis is formulated, tested, and determined to be proven or not. With research-proven interventions, those are typically supported by journal articles, published research. An example of this a research-proven intervention level would be an empirical research may determine that intervention A has an effect that is statistically significantly different in comparison to no intervention or intervention B. And in the last 2 years, we've certainly had a lot of dialogue in the area of research-proven interventions. Within your application, you'll be able to provide links within the narrative response block that provides more information as to the classification of the intervention or curriculum, and/or you can upload reports or research to support that classification. Next slide. Okay, measurement tools and methodology. This is a separate narrative question, or a question that requests a narrative response. And in this response, what you'll talk about is the actual tool that you're going to use to indicate where your gains are for each outcome. And so examples of measurement tools and methodology might be a validated instrument or a standardized assessment, a post or pre-post test that accompanies a selected activity or curriculum, a measure that indicates progress supported by industry standards, and also it might be a comparison that you set at the state or national level to compare to your local data that you've collected at the program, within your program. And also there might be a test or a survey developed by the applicant organization. For a bit of clarification, I have a little definition there of a validated instrument. We found in the last round of applications that there might have been an assumption that if you have an evidence-based curriculum, that the pre-post test at the end is a validated instrument, and that's not necessarily the case. Validated instruments become so through a very long process of expert opinion with measures at levels of confidence of validity and reliability. Basically, if you have an instrument that's standardized or validated, you will know so, and it's often got its own separate platform of research. So within this application, you will be asked to provide a brief description of each test or measure or measurement instrument, including its appropriate use, particularly with the population that it should be used with, and let us know what it's intended to measure, the test administration protocol, scoring methodology, and the change or effect indicators. For example, is it high, medium, low rankings? Is it certain scores have a range that's associated with a positive result? And as with the former slide, you'll be able to provide links within your response, within the narrative response block. And please upload materials that are pertinent to any and all measurement tools and methodology so that we can better understand your test instrument. Excuse me, next slide. Performance measures. This will be for each performance measure that you're providing that associates with a primary service intervention or curriculum. You'll be asked to provide information against this list of indicators. And typically it will be a short phrase or a number. And then the responses to that will end up producing an evaluation table that you can review and edit. So I'll review these quickly. You'll be asked to provide the primary goal of each intervention or curriculum and the projected length of participation, the intended participant population, total number of associated participants, child and or adult, meaningful improvement, target percentage, and you'll also be asked to upload the measurement instrument as it relates to each performance measure you're proposing and when it is administered. I've highlighted target percentage because that refers to, of all individuals that participate, typically at any level, the target percentage is the percentage that is expected to achieve the desired effect. And I've highlighted meaningful improvement that occurs at the individual level, and it infers that an intervention or curriculum has had the expected result. So this may be that you propose a specific difference in score or rate. You propose that the individual or family that's participated has met a certain acquired a certain skill at a specific level. It may be that the family or the child has reached a critical benchmark. So that wouldn't be a pre-post score or a post measure as much as based on the effects of this program, did this child, if this was associated with your program mission, graduate from high school, for example, or that the individual participant has avoided a negative consequence. Okay, I don't have a slide for this, but what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about advancing your current performance measures, just some ideas. Many of you that, well, if you are applying for continuance of funding, you've been with us at least 5 years. And so this is your opportunity to really look at every measure, performance, measurement, test measure, measurement instrument, and see if it can be advanced in any way. If you have any survey or test item that's been developed by the organization, this may be the time that you want to reach out to other providers or research the possibilities of an alternative, because there's many products available to consider. Sometimes a survey is very iconic to a specific activity. So in that instance, you may consider or wish to consider presenting those results narratively as an output per process evaluation, as opposed to elevating it to a performance measure. I wanted to speak to validated test instruments. There are many validated test instruments available. And in preparing and developing this RFP, I actually found several validated test instruments in the field of protective factors in the public domain, free, one validated at scale and subscale. So that might be something that you wish to look into, so that if you have performance measures that rely on a post score with an evidence-based curricula or research-based curricula, you may want to look for something that really speaks to the result that you want to propose to us, and see if a validated test instrument might be something to include at this time. Meaningful improvement. We are looking, when it's possible, for a level of change that's more than just any change or 1 point higher. What we hope with meaningful improvement is that it's higher than the occurrence of a change by chance alone. And that doesn't typically occur with 1 point higher on a pre-post scored test. So we would encourage you to, for example, dialogue with the evaluation staff of any curriculum you're proposing. They do have evaluation staff and team members that you can talk to about meaningful improvement, potentially. You may wish to reach out to the lead investigator or researcher associated with a measurement instrument, particularly a validated instrument, to talk about meaningful improvement. I do this a lot. I reach out quite a lot to researchers. I find them mostly embedded in universities, and they really are very open about talking about their measurement instruments and talking about, how you can use that to show gains. You might also want to reach out to national programs. The RFP has a lot of embedded references and resources under the domain of what's working. And so you might want to look to other programs and ask them what have they been doing to measure and show positive effects. Also, if you've been with us for 5 years or more, you may have a lot, you have a lot of raw data accumulated and associated with current outcomes. And so you may want to look at your raw data over the last many years and see if you can determine meaningful improvement based on the actual range of the pre-scores, if there is a pre-score, and the actual post-side range of scores. You may also want to consider if it's actual data splitting your performance measures, because oftentimes with one pre-post measure, there's children or participants that start out at the lower end and have a much higher lift or range of improvement than ones that start out at a pre-score point, kind of higher into the range. And that might be a more condensed lift, but we don't want to eliminate them. And often, or every once in a while, I've come across measurement instruments that have represent curricula that children have been exposed to in a multiple of settings. So they start out in the higher range of the pre-score, may not have as high of a lift, but we want to look at what that lift potential is. And also, as referenced on the prior slide, we're kind of a fan of benchmarks. So it's kind of a yes, no response, but you may look at what outcomes or results your participants have attained and propose that to be measured. For example, if it's a job skills training program, you might have an outcome based on a score, because you often would provide training on how to be a good worker, good employer, information specific to the industry. You might have yes, no, they had completed their internship, but did they also at the end of the program or early into the post program actually achieve early employment? So that's an example of a benchmark that could strengthen your proposals. And the last thing is, I love questions. And so I'd rather you, there is an ask a question format or within the online application, and Carol will route you to that. And so ask any question. We don't want you to be confused, and we'll reach out as soon as possible. So thank you so much. And I'm trying to check if there's any questions.
Great point, Chanda. Do you want to take a break and check in with Nicole and see if there are any questions we need to address now before I move on to accessing our online application?
Sure. I don't see any, but Nicole, do you have any questions that?
I have no questions yet.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for your time. And we really look forward to hearing all of your wonderful, innovative ideas.
Thanks, Chanda. Okay, so next we're going to go through some of the components of the application. The application's link is available on our website. And for those of you who have access to SAMUS, if you click on the grants module, you'll be routed to that RFP application there as well. So going to our websites is probably the easiest way. Some housekeeping kind of things to keep in mind is if you ever, and this is sort of with all things SAMUS, which is the umbrella that the grants module falls within, the recommended internet browser is Google Chrome. So if you see anything that looks like you need to reach out for help and raise that flag, my first question to you will be, are you using Google Chrome? And if you're not, that can often resolve whatever issues you might be seeing in the application. There are 2 different emails that you can utilize that will send messages to respective team members here at CSC. So if you have any questions with regards to the application for program related components of the application, please send an email to programsupport@cscmc.org. If they are fiscally minded questions for those fiscal components of the application, then send an email to fiscalsupport@cscmc.org. And as Chanda mentioned, there's also a really cool ask a question component of the actual application, which is nice because that would give the opportunity for the answers to your question to be published for other people to benefit from that information. If the question is very specific to your organization, it doesn't make sense to publish it for all to see, we will be sure to not publish it. That in mind, the very first, oopsie, sorry, danced too far. So if you are already funded, your agency will be listed when you go to start your application. If you're not listed, then you would click on agency not listed, and then you will put in your FEIN number. Sunbiz is the venue that will then validate that number. If for some reason it doesn't validate, then you can certainly send a request to us at cscmc.org, or program support at cscmc.org would also work, with your agency's name, your FEI number, and your address, and we can resolve that on your behalf. So part of a pre-application process is to do a couple of things. One is to name your application, and the other is to fill out some pre-application questions that basically says you're eligible for funding, as well as this is an opportunity to add some authorized users to the application. The application itself is accessible by as many people as you authorize to use it. So I just want to point out, though, that if you don't know all the people that might need access to the application, there is a time later, once you've started your application and start working on it, to add more authorized users if you need to. But that also brings me to the point that there is no opportunity to change the title of your application. So something that we noticed on our last competitive RFP that we released last year was that there were a couple of applicants that were unsure of the name that they wanted to title the program and put things like TBD. And then unfortunately, there's no way to go back and modify this part of the application because it's in the pre-application portion. So be sure you know what to name your application. Most people use their organization and the name of the program. There is a little note on this slide that mentions that if you're applying for more than one program, to specify the area, but honestly, what we're looking for is your organization and the program's name. There will be time in the application for you to specify which priority area the program aligns with them. Then the pre-application questions I mentioned earlier are ones that you will want to read carefully and answer appropriately for your program. Basically, what this does is identify whether you're eligible for funding from CSC or not. If there's any technical issues, just let us know. And then I will take a moment to ask for any questions that there might be while I share the screen for the live application.
We still do not have any questions.
Okie dokie. So from here, I am impersonating Testy McTesterson. Testy is has already started an application, but I'm bringing you to the initial page that you come to when you click the link to start a new application. So what you'll see initially, this little message about our proposers conference will go away shortly, but then you'll see information specific to the solicitation. Obviously, it's going to specify which priority areas we are requesting proposals for, and the funding cycle, and then who's currently funded, more information about how you might be eligible for funding, and some specific information to the priority areas. As you scroll down, you'll see this nifty start a new application button. That's what you'll click when it's time to start your new application. For this, in this situation, Testy had already started an application. And so it falls under this pod called My Applications. This will look the same for you. So when you initially start your application and then you come back into SAMIS, into the grants module, you'll be able to click right here and open up that application that you've already started. You'll also see that there is a timeline here that specifies when we released it, the deadline to submit questions, which is 5 minutes before the deadline to submit the application, and then when the selection announcement will be made, which is when we also make the recommendations to council in August. We have a long list of resources that are available for you to click on. This was mentioned earlier by Laura, and so you'll see the actual RFP, the strategic plan, the program and funding policies. As a reminder, these were just modified last week. The chart of accounts also just recently modified, a sample contract and budget for your benefit. And then these are the data sheets that were also more recently updated with 2022 data. So there's links that go directly to those data sheets. And these are data that is specifically connected to the priority areas for which we've released. You'll also see this very cool ask a question function, and you'll also be able to see the questions and answers of other people as well. So I didn't do a test to ask a question, but it's pretty simple. You're just going to click that blue button and ask your question. Just like there is 2 ways to do just about everything, it also has that ask a question function here. So I'm going to click into Testy's application, which had been started. And you'll see that there is this handy dandy counter, a timer that actually at some point turns red. So no pressure there, but it is meant to give you a good live action idea of how much time you have left to submit your application. And as of right now, you have 23 days, 6 hours, 12 minutes, and 39 seconds. So with that in mind, you'll see that you can navigate around in the application by clicking on these different section headers. Right now, though, I am in the view application component of the application. So in order to make any changes, you must click the modify button with that little pencil. As you navigate around in the application, know that all of your different authorized users can also work on the application at the same time. The only thing I caution you is that if you are working on the same section, it can get a little tricky. You will know, though, if someone is working on the same section as you, because on the page, on the section you're working on, that person's name who's also on that page will pop up on your screen. So that's a good little warning to know and maybe communicate with that other user that, hey, I'm going to work on this section for now and you can come back to it later, just because every time you click save and continue later or the next button, it saves your work. So if you happen to do that before the person who's also working in that section does it, then their work would get lost. This does not apply, however, if they're in a totally different section than you. So right now I'm in the certification section. If someone is in any of these other sections, it is not a problem for them to work and save their work throughout the process of writing the proposal. So you can literally dance around to different sections of the application by clicking the section header. And then as a matter of fact, for this section, there have been, for those of you who are familiar with our applications and have started to understand what a typical application looks like, there has been a couple of changes, making sure you pay extra special attention to all those new questions and what we're asking for within the narrative questions. But for example, this was some new function that we added. We want you to put in the total dollar amount requested for this proposal. And then if you're currently awarded, what amount are you currently awarded at? And then if you're asking for more money than you currently receive, then you would write all the information about what that proposed increase would cover. So again, when it comes to making sure that you can use these mark the section as completed functions as an internal communication, but ultimately for the application to be submitted, every one of these sections need to have a green check mark indicating that every question has been answered and that the section is complete. Once the section is marked complete, it doesn't prohibit you from going back in to modify it if you need to. The only thing that prevents you from modifying your application is if you submit it to us. So you've got plenty of time to work through different sections. If you have an asterisk next to a field, that indicates it's a mandatory field. So you wouldn't be able to, for example, mark this section as completed and then click the next button, because it's going to come up with several different errors that say, hey, don't forget this section's required, this question's required, etc. So unclicking that to move forward would be another option. So again, anytime you click next or save and continue later, that saves your work. It will indicate if there's anything that hasn't been answered if you try to select the mark this section completed button. Moving forward, going back to this program summary, I want to just bring your attention that often there's different people filling this section out than there is with the budget table, for example. So wanting to make sure that whoever entered this amount knows that that number is the one that needs to match the total request of CSC funds column in the budget table. So just a reminder that sometimes that doesn't translate between person to person, and that's an important thing to remember. Let's see. So just going back, if you're making any changes, so if I wanted to add, for example, primary adults into this primary and group participants section and say we're currently serving 25 and we want to now serve 50, save entry. If you go back and you don't see, for example, in the application details, the change that you just made in your application, then that can be easily solved by going into this section here where it has your name in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that and click the refresh clear cache button. That is once you've entered the data, click next, and you don't see it here on your summary where you're viewing your application. Once you click that refresh clear cache button, you should see what had just been entered in. So now the primary adult line appears. So this is something that came along with the newer version of SAMUS. So those of you who are getting familiar with the new version of SAMUS, or for anybody who's never used SAMUS before or the grants module, please remember that this refresh clear cache button is something you need to do every so often so that you will be able to see the changes you've made in the application once they've been saved. So moving forward, clicking back on that, once you're in this view application, you can't make any changes. So clicking on the modify button, moving forward, you'll see several different opportunities. There's some information here where you'll see where there's an upload that's required. This upload is one that Chanda mentioned, for example. So if you have more than one thing to upload, you can do that just by continuing to click choose file. It will allow you to upload as many documents within that same field as many times as you need to, and then they will appear in your application for you to be able to click on later. I do caution you to name them something that makes sense so that it's not numbers and letters and nonsense, so that we can be able to go into the file and know that I'm looking at the backup documentation for such and such, for example. So labeling it in a way that makes sense to the reader is very helpful. And so keeping that in mind would be great. Just as a reminder, we do look for collaborative agreements upon application, but when it comes to, so you have a space to actually upload the physical agreement, but when it comes to subcontractors, if you plan to propose using subcontractors within this proposal, you do not have to upload the actual agreement because we understand that usually comes later, but those subcontract agreements and the respective certificates of insurance would be requested if funding was approved by the council, and that would need to happen prior to contract execution. So you'll notice that we do want to know who you plan to subcontract with, if any, and also what services they'll be provided, but the actual subcontract agreement will come later if the proposal is approved. And then let's see, within the staffing table, you'll see the space to have a total. which will then be transferred over into the budget table, as Zach mentioned. So making sure that your budget contains salaries and wages if there's anything in the staffing table in the section prior. And then let's see, lastly, the supporting documents. I tried to move forward without it. So let's see, the supporting documents are some that are required, almost all of them. The only thing that's not required and it does not have the asterisk is a waiver request. So that only applies to the folks that are not able to fully comply with the contract or policies. And that waiver request does need to be submitted with your application. One thing that's a little different is instead of uploading the job descriptions within the staffing table, for those of you who filled out applications with us in the past, we've now moved them to the support docs tab. So any job descriptions for CSCMC funded positions must be uploaded here. Again, if you have multiple job descriptions to upload, just keep on click and choose file. You'll also see several others that were mentioned by Zach on his slide within the presentation. And there's another note about the subcontract agreements and respective certificates of insurance. We also typically request certificates of insurance depending on the program at different levels. But those certificates of insurance for the organization themselves will also be requested after the application has been submitted. So did I miss anything, everybody? Okay, so one thing that you'll note, once you have all of the green check marks here, until then you won't see it, there will be a button that appears that says submit application. I believe it's green. So just know that until all of these sections have green check marks, you won't see that submit application button. And then if you want to go back to the solicitation itself to ask a question, you can navigate to it from here and it'll bring you back. And then that ask a question is right there. So hopefully that answers all of your questions. But we do want to open it up to anybody who wants to continue asking questions from here. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see our faces.
I don't have any new questions. We've been answering them as they've come in.
Great. Okay, so the recorded version of this proposers conference will be available. We're going to probably put it in a couple different places for you. And I believe the PowerPoint will also be available. Is that right, Laura? Okay.
Yes.
So
Do we want to give just a minute for a couple of questions in case they come in before we? Looks like we're okay.
I have lots of thank yous.
you're welcome, Sam. Okay.
It doesn't.
So you have a couple of resources. You've got program support at cscmc.org, fiscal support at cscmc.org. You have the ask a question function. So if there are any issues, you know that we're here to support you, and we look forward to reading your proposals.
Great. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, this recording will be posted on our website. So if one of your colleagues has not been able to attend today and has a need to review what we shared today, that's going to be possible via the website. I wish everyone good luck. We look forward to your submissions and encourage you to get busy. You got about a month. So thank you all for your interest and your participation today.
I did have one question that came in the chat. If we already have a contract and want to continue with that program, but also do a new proposal for another program, would we submit to RFPs, one for each?
Yes.
Yes, if it's a newly proposed program, it'd be a separate application.
And if you're currently funded under one of these two priority areas that we've released with this application, you would submit one application for the program you wish to continue and another application for the new program that you hope to get funded. This is a competitive process across the board for everybody.
I think that's it.
Yay. All right, we did that in an hour. Congratulations, everyone. You now have some time on your books. I hope you have a good day.
Bye, everybody.